All rise for the jury. You may be seated, ladies and gentlemen. All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome back. Sorry for the inconvenience this morning with the parking and everything, so hopefully we'll get that resolved for all of you as easily as we can. All right, on behalf of the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please report the state of Ohio rests this case.
All right, thank you. Okay, is there anything on behalf of Mr. Pardon?
Good morning, Your Honor. Thank you. Judge, at this time, the defense will rest. We do not wish to present any evidence.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, okay, you've heard all the evidence that you're going to hear in this case. Okay, we're now going to move to closing arguments of counsel. A closing arguments of counsel is not evidence. Hopefully the information that the attorneys provide to you at this time will help you as you are considering the evidence and ultimately deliberating. Okay, because the state of Ohio has the burden of proof, the state will have two opportunities to close. So on behalf of the state.
Thank you, Your Honor.
If you need to move the podium, you can.
I'm good, thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
First off, on behalf of all the parties, we would like to thank you. You've all been very attentive, you all have shown up, and you all have paid attention this entire time. And we really do appreciate that. Because we do know it's hard. We've asked you to put your life on hold for a couple weeks now, so we do appreciate all the work you're doing. But your job's not done. Now comes the hard part. And I'm going to go through some things, some evidence, and if you remember the facts or the evidence differently, use your collective memory. This is what I remember. And as the judge stated, closing arguments are not evidence. They're here to help you, to aid you when you go back and deliberate on these charges. Aggravated murder. Count one. And again, you don't have to ferociously write this down. You will get this all in writing. This is just to help you understand how the facts apply to the law. January 28, 2018 to January 29, 2018. You're going to see that date range on all of the counts. And that's because that's the day we knew Rachel was alive and the day we knew that she was dead. You all heard evidence to where you can conclude when she was murdered. But that's why we have that date range. Purposely. And with prior calculation and design, caused the death of Rachael Anderson. Let's talk a little bit about some of these terms. And again, the judge is going to give you the law. Purpose, the specific intention to cause a certain result. Us lawyers sometimes like to mess with words and stuff, but you will have all these definitions back there. Do something intentionally and not accidentally. You're asked to look at the facts and circumstances in this case, including using a deadly weapon in a manner calculated to destroy life. Cords used around her neck to strangle her to unconsciousness. Knife in the back of her head. You think that was calculated to destroy life? I'd submit to you that it is. And you heard testimony about that from Dr. Daniels. Strangulation. Ms. Roush asked him, is this consistent with a struggle? Yes, it is. Compress, release. Compress, release. The stabbing to the back of the head. The amount of force needed to chip off a piece of bone of her skull. How hard does that knife have to be shoved in? Prior calculation and design. This isn't something where it needs to be mapped out. We don't have to find a journal written about every step that was going to be taken. Didn't have to plan it for weeks. That's not what that means. How many of you have seen Ocean's 11, where they all get together, make the big plan to rob the casino? That's not it. That would count, but that's not what was required under Ohio law. No definite period of time must elapse, and no particular amount of consideration must be given. There isn't a magic formula. But it can't be spur of the moment. I ask you to look at the evidence. 7:59 to 9:25 p.m. Almost an hour and a half. It's a long time. Intricate knots. Think, ladies and gentlemen, of all of the things that were used. Her hair dryer. You had to walk and go get that. Her curling knife. Had to walk and go get that too. Pieces of the blinds. Had to go cut that off. Pieces of her belt. Had to cut that in half. And what about the knife? Downstairs. Every step he took. That qualifies as prior calculation and design. This isn't spur of the moment. How long did it take to tie all of those knots so tight that Agent Durst couldn't untie them himself? He had to cut them off. Compress, release. Compress, release. Does that seem like spur of the moment to you? 4 other counts, and they have different language than count 1, but they're all aggravated murder. And again, same date range, purposely, cause the death of Rachael Anderson, while committing or attempting to commit, or while fleeing immediately after committing or attempting to commit. Those 4 things. Aggravated burglary, kidnapping, rape, aggravated robbery. Again, purpose, same as before. Look at the same things, the circumstances, the evidence you've heard surrounding this. The big difference is there's no prior calculation and design required for those counts of aggravated murder. He kills her during the course of or while fleeing after committing, again, those 4 things. Aggravated robbery, kidnapping, aggravated burglary. He kills her after and while he trespasses in her own home, her place of safety, the place where she sleeps, the place where she eats, the place where she comes home to relax. Her own home, ladies and gentlemen. He kills her after and while he kidnaps her. The second he is in that home trespassing and she is not free to leave, that's kidnapping. Doesn't have to be tied up for that to count as kidnapping. The second he comes in and she is not allowed to leave, that's kidnapping. He kills her after he has raped her. And he kills her after getting her PIN number and takes her debit card. Takes those things from her. And I ask you not to get too hung up on the term while. It doesn't indicate that the killing must occur at the same instant as the underlying felony. Or that the killing must have been caused by it. Don't get too hung up on the word while. But rather, it indicates the killing must be directly associated with the underlying felony as part of one continuous occurrence. He is in her house. He is trespassing in her house. He keeps her in there with a knife, with wrapping or tying her up. He rapes her, gets her PIN number, takes her card, and then goes. That is all one continuous occurrence. This is a series of crimes during one period. That is what you focus on. These specifications, these are these 4 additional factual questions for you on each count of the aggravated murder. Purposely caused Rachel's death while committing or attempting to commit, or fleeing immediately after committing or attempting to commit, again, those 4 things. Aggravated burglary, kidnapping, rape, aggravated robbery. Aggravated burglary is count 2 of the indictment that you will hear about. Again, same date range. By force, stealth, or deception, any of those. Trespass in an occupied structure, Rachel's home, 3044 Allegheny Avenue, Apartment B, with the purpose to commit any criminal offense. And inflicted, attempted to inflict, or threatened to inflict physical harm upon Rachel, and or had a deadly weapon on or about his person, in this case, a knife, or under his control. Again, force, stealth, or deception, any of these count. And the criminal offense inside her apartment. Serious physical harm and deadly weapon both apply in this case. Again, ladies and gentlemen, her own home. We know she had to leave her door unlocked. You heard testimony about that. The deadbolts, the only way she could lock the door. Johnny Anderson took her key. Her door was unlocked when she left that night. Count 4. Again, same date range. Kidnapping by force or threat. Removed Rachel from the place where she was found and or restrained her of her liberty. For any one of these purposes, we believe they all apply, but any one of these would suffice. Terrorizing or inflicting serious physical harm upon her. Terrorize, think we have that. Almost an hour and a half in her apartment. To engage in sexual activity against her will, where's his DNA? To facilitate the commission of a felony, and again, aggravated burglary and or aggravated robbery or flight thereafter. It's not like the TV and movies. Ms. Rauch talked a little bit about it in voir dire. You don't need a ransom note. Don't need to take her across state lines to count as kidnapping. Under Ohio law, kidnapping does not need to be for any specific distance or duration of time or in any specific manner. Again, from the time he confronts her in her own home until he kills her, she is being kidnapped. She is not free to leave. And again, even if she isn't tied up at that point, she is not free to leave her own home. Let's talk about force. You saw the blunt force trauma to the top of her head. The intricate knots to hogtie her. And the blood trail in her bedroom. I ask you to look at that picture. To look. You see the line that will go from the middle of her bedroom to her closet. Dragged. Rape is count 6. Again, same date range. Engaged in sexual conduct with Rachel. In this case, vaginal penetration. Purposely compelled her to submit by force or threat of force. And again, a big thing too is we don't have to prove that she resisted. That is not part of something that the state of Ohio has to prove. But even if so, there is evidence of a struggle. You heard John Kennedy talk about that picture. That was something that meant something to him. Marilyn Monroe was on the ground. Look at her room. That's not how she normally kept it. Male DNA under her fingernails. hog-tied, t-shirt over her head, with a cord wrapped around it. And she's naked from the waist down, ladies and gentlemen. Use your common sense and reason. His YSTR DNA is inside her body, inside her vagina. How did it get there, ladies and gentlemen? Aggravated robbery. Count 8. Same date range. In committing a theft offense upon Rachel, one of the following. He had a deadly weapon, a knife in this case, on his person or under his control. And again, you'll have some and/ors here. Any of them apply. And displayed, and/or brandished, and/or indicated he had it, and/or used the weapon. Recklessly inflicted serious physical harm on Rachel. He has to get her PIN number while she's still alive, guys. It's her brother's birthday. You think Anthony Pardon's going to know her brother's birthday? No. He had to get it from her while she was still alive. While he's committing the theft offense, he has the knife and/or recklessly inflicts serious physical harm. There's a stab wound to the back of her head and neck, and there's a knife found with her blood and hair on it. And this still applies when you steal somebody after you've killed them. Again, this is where we don't want you to get too caught up in the wild. This still counts if you steal from them after you have murdered them. All the debit card transactions. Those are important to look at. He may not be the one always doing the dirty work. He's not the one putting it in the ATM, sliding it to buy clothes. But he's always there. And it also doesn't matter when you see that he gets declined sometimes. That does not matter. Doesn't matter that he doesn't get money each and every time he goes to the ATM. Let's talk a little about before. You heard testimony that Anthony Pardon's girlfriend, Rachael Anderson, lived in Cardinal Creek apartment complex. So yeah, he's been around there. Her daughter, Allison Gamble, lived right next to Rachel, right next door. But Allison moved out in December before the murder. But Bernita still lived there. And Anthony stayed with her when he wasn't staying with Deborah Pardon, his sister. So yeah, it makes sense when Jennifer Lester testified. With the cell towers, his phone should be there. He's staying with her sometimes. That makes sense. And Detective Hughes stated, you can see Rachel's apartment from Bernita's apartment. You can see through to her back door. And I know it's a little bit hard to see, but Detective Hughes testified that that right there is where Bernita's apartment is. You can see through to Rachel's apartment. Right there. So let's walk through the weekend. January 26th, the Friday. Birthday celebration begins. John comes down to stay with Rachel. There's text message. There's testimony to support that. Rachel takes her house key off, her lanyard, gives it to John. Here, I gotta go to work tomorrow. Have the key. Go hang out in Columbus. Drive around. Your testimony that Tina Kennedy, John Kennedy, and John Anderson hang out at Rachel's apartment that night. And that makes sense. Whose DNA is on the cigar? Whose DNA is on the blunts? On the smoking pipe? They sat around and smoked some weed, watched some TV, hung out. The Kennedys leave, and John Anderson stays at his sister's apartment. And you heard John testify there was nothing weird between Rachel and John Kennedy. They had that issue, but everything seemed fine. It was normal. They're having a birthday party. Saturday, January 27th. the day of the birthday party. Rachel goes to work. John Anderson hangs out at her apartment until she comes home. Got an explanation for his DNA. It was embarrassing for him, but he told you guys. They go to the Kennedys' home for their birthday party. They drink some alcohol, smoke some weed, loud music. I think John described it as a great party. Made her a cake celebrating her being single and making money. And this is supported by Rachel's phone records. She's over on the west side, Kennedy's house, near her cell towers. Then she's kind of in the short north area, downtown, because they went to a club. And then they all come back and spend the night at the Kennedy's house. I think John testified that he was way too drunk and he passed out. So he didn't go down to the pub with them. Wake up the next morning and go back to Rachel's apartment. January 28, 2018 is Rachel's birthday. She turned 24 years old that day. John and Rachel head back to her apartment. He packs up, heads home to his girlfriend's, Warren, Ohio. He thought it was, early afternoon, something like that. And then she realizes, a little bit before 2, John has her key. And that's supported by the phone call that you will see that she made to John Anderson at 1:58 p.m. She texts John Kennedy about the key and texts him when she's going to leave. This is when timing becomes important. John testified that they were taking a friend back to Athens, so she couldn't come over right away to get it. So she waited, and then there's a text at 6:17 p.m. that she's leaving in 20 minutes to come pick up her key. And that's on State's Exhibit T2. John testified she arrived at the house, didn't stay long. She's pretty tired from partying, kind of hungover. And she wanted to go home. So took the key and went back home. Testified that about 25 to 30 minutes to get between their houses. He lived on the west side. Also on January 28th, we know that she's back at her end of town sometime after 7:32 p.m. There's an Arby's receipt. There's Arby's food in her house. Cake is set up on the counter. And I ask you to notice some details. The ketchup is opened. She opened up the ketchup, started eating her french fries. But she never got to finish that meal, because you saw it in the pictures on the floor. First missed call, Haley Kennedy at 8:49 p.m. And Rachael Anderson is never heard from again. Ladies and gentlemen, what else was happening around 8 p.m.? Anthony Pardon's phone starts moving towards Rachel's apartment. This is from Detective's Hal geolocation report. And this makes sense. That's Bernita's apartment. That's where the first hit is. Okay, that makes sense. But wait a minute. There are 35 hits over and around Rachel's apartment. So there's a difference between Bernita's and Rachel's. This isn't a confusion of technology. This isn't a Wi-Fi hit reaching too far over. This is Bernita's. This is Rachel's. Where are most of those hits? Rachel's. 35 times, ladies and gentlemen, every minute and a half to 2 minutes, his phone is hitting. I need a Wi-Fi signal. I need a cell tower signal. I need GPS. You heard Detective Hal. Pretty impressive resume. And it's in his expert opinion that this is accurate. And I ask you to think about your own experiences. You trust Google Maps to get you places, right? When you check in places, restaurants, Your phone tells you where you are. And it's usually really accurate. And it's right. Detective Howell testified Harding could be anywhere within that display radius. You know where those display radiuses all encompass? Rachel's apartment. Ladies and gentlemen, what is he doing in her apartment for almost an hour and a half? Debit card usage. Anthony Slew. Does that look like a criminal mastermind to you? 61 years old, homeless guy. His details were very consistent with the surveillance we had. He knew the PIN number for Rachel's debit card. 0602, John Anderson's birthday. Why does Anthony Sleep know that? Oh, because the guy that asked him to use it, he told him. That's how he knew the debit card. And if you remember his interview, he says, I messed it up a couple of times. That's why, I was taking longer, the ATM. 0602, he remembered that. What was his description? A man, he said, a little bit lighter skinned than me, younger, chubby cheeks, close haircut, slight southern accent, and a gold chain. You see this gold chain also in the Rife Center surveillance still. You heard Detective Hughes state that he found out Anthony Pardon was in Georgia for a little while. And this is the other interesting thing. Anthony Sleet's DNA is not found anywhere. No swabs, on nothing. But you know he's in the car. You see him get out in surveillance. But his DNA wasn't there. Geolocation. Anthony Pardon's phone is everywhere Rachel's debit card is used that night. Everywhere. Every single stop. You see surveillance of Rachel's car. Anthony Pardon's phone is there too. And if you remember in one of the surveillance videos, you see a hand come out and wipe off the door handle and then come back in. And you'll have these in the back, but I ask you to look at these maps that Jennifer Lester put together, that Detective Howell put together. All these places. Now the times might be off by a minute or two, but Anthony Pardon's phone is there. It's there. It's there. His phone is everywhere her debit card is used. He's just having somebody else do his dirty work at that point. January 29th, 2018. The first look at the apartment. Rachel doesn't show up for work. She's a creature of habit. You heard multiple people testify. She's not answering her phone. That's odd. Trent Snyder was her coworker. He's the one who saw the candle burning. Tried to get the leasing agent to let him in. She said no, so then he called the police. Lisa Richardson was that leasing agent. She goes in the first time, blows out the candle. She said she just briefly looked around. But she did have some interesting details. She had to unlock Rachel's door. It wasn't open. She had to unlock it. There were no signs of forced entry. Because she said she looks for that when you're going to do a well-being check. Officer Sclafani from the Columbus Police Department, he couldn't go in with Lisa the first time because they don't have probable cause. And if you think about that, that makes sense. You're hungover from your birthday party before. Do you want a police officer walking into your apartment? The second look on January 29th. Family and friends are now extremely worried. Now, mid-afternoon, nobody's heard from Rachel. But her car's parked in the complex, but not where it should be. It's around the corner. Jonathan Kennedy arrives. He goes in with Lisa. He notices that cake because he helped make it for her. Goes upstairs, and he said he checked the towel to see if maybe she'd gotten ready for work. Did she take a shower that morning? No, it was dry. Then he goes to Rachel's bedroom, and I ask you to think about his description of trying to open that closet door. It was like somebody was pulling back. Finally opens it. Every way I pulled, I was choking her. Every way he pulled. He screams and runs downstairs. I heard Officer Sclafani talk about how he appeared when Jonathan's running down the stairs. Terrified, pale. So Sclafani calls for medics and other officers. Also on January 29th, Agent Durst. Again, quite a resume. Done a lot of scenes, seen a lot of things. The amount of times I wish I would have counted that he said intricate knots. This is a man that has been out to hundreds of scenes, and that's how he described them, as intricate. He couldn't untie most of them. He had to cut it. They were tight. I asked you to look at the coroner's photos. Look at one of her wrists, where the rope is. You can see the indentation of the design. That's how tight those were on her. The heating blanket cord was around the knob. He said that it was wrapped around so many rotations when they take it off. And once around her neck. Pay attention to the damage of the door. Pay attention to the length of the heating cord. We talked about saturation stains, transfer stains. Think about what that means, where Rachel was laying at certain times during that night. Also important, Durst didn't find her any debit or credit cards, or her keys in her apartment. And I apologize that you have to look at this again, but I ask you to look at it, ladies and gentlemen, because look at these knots. Look at how intricate these are. And what are these two things tied together? The hairdryer and the curling iron. Those are touching. They're intertwined. Look at how intricate this is. How it's knotted, it's looped through, it's wrapped around and around and around and around. Her hands, look at this. The blind cords were cut. This belt, all intertwined. Intricate knots. Anthony Pardon on January 29th. Where is he? Well, we can tell. We have him at the Rife Center around 10 a.m. Geolocation and surveillance. The Fine Fare Food Mart. Geolocation and surveillance. ExxonMobil. Geolocation puts him there. City Trends. Surveillance. Geolocation. And Deborah Pardon. All put him there. DSW. Surveillance. Geolocation. And Deborah Pardon. Rachel's debit card is being used at all of these places at the same time or very close in time. Again, on January 29th, we talk about Deborah Pardon. You heard from her. It's not easy to get up and testify against family, and none of us envy her for that. She talked about, Anthony asked, hey, you want to go use a debit card? Sure, I'll go use it. She talked about her criminal history. You don't think he thought about that when he was trying to figure out who can I get to help me use this debit card? She uses the card at City Trends and DSW. But who is always around her? Anthony Pardon. Who comes at City Trends and puts an extra pair of shoes on that clothing? Anthony Pardon. She uses it by herself. And she admitted that to you. I took it. I used it myself at the Kroger and at the casino. Ladies and gentlemen, geolocation puts Anthony Pardon on the complete other side of town. supporting what Deborah told you, and showing that Detective Hal is not just cherry picking what he's showing to you, what he analyzed in the data. She testified that Anthony Pardon gave her the PIN number on a piece of paper. And she started to get emotional, and said later on, she sat straight up in bed because she heard on the news that name. How'd she recognize that name? It was on that debit card. And she said that she talked to Anthony. What did he say to her when she asked him about the card? Don't worry about it. And you can look at the searches on her phone. Deborah was panicking. Look at those searches. And then January 30th to February 1st of 2018. Again, Anthony Pardon. Rachel's card is continuing to be used. And again, where is Anthony Pardon? Are you seeing a pattern? He's at the same locations where her cards are being used. Again, geolocation and surveillance put him in both of these places. The Find Fair Food Mart on January 30th and the Pick and Go on February 1st. And at the Pick and Go, you saw surveillance videos as he's walking down the sidewalk. He picks his scarf up and puts it across his face. Now, if you're cold in the middle of January, or end of January, beginning of February, don't you have the scarf up before you walk into the store? No, he puts it up as he's walking into the store. Why is he doing that? Now let's talk about the after. Agent Durst collected the knife from Rachel's mother, matches the set in her apartment, was still covered in blood, long blonde hair. And she said that she found it in a box of Halloween decorations that was in that closet, that coat closet downstairs. Anthony Pardon was arrested and his car was searched. This is important, ladies and gentlemen. February 8th. This is after the lab advised Detective Hughes of the suspect that they had found. After. The phone was found in the car he was driving. Where do you put your phone when you're driving? Right here next to you? That's where that phone was found. And the hat he wore in multiple surveillance videos. Where's that? Backseat. Residence of Deborah and Anthony Pardon was searched. The hat she wore to City Trends and DSW in the casino. That's found. And Detective Hughes requests follow-up and phone records, more DNA testing, and surveillance were available. He didn't just stop once they found a suspect. He kept working. Let's talk about DNA. I know it was a long testimony. We warned you it might be boring, but it's important. Lindsay Simon came in and talked to you. She's a DNA analyst. Let's talk about mixtures, because I feel like that's going to be something that's going to be thrown at you quite a bit. Don't be misled. A mixture could be one allele. Remember, talk about how sensitive these machines are now. They can pick up one extra allele. And most of the unidentified mixtures could never be identified, even if she had a known standard. There's just too little. It's just not a good quality. And again, we talked about low quantity and quality. Why could that happen? Wiping off would affect it. Time, environment, and some people just shed more. Lottery example. Would you play on Monday? You were 20.5 billion times more likely to win? It's a pretty good example. Again, high numbers for the STR DNA is a good result for a scientist. They even assumed Rachel and some of the statistics to make them lower. Ladies and gentlemen, 20.5 billion was a lower number. 14 billion was a lower number. And then the YSTR. That low number 0 is a good result for a scientist. Anthony Pardon and his male relatives is that group, not some random group of people. We know the group. Now let's talk about where DNA was found. Inner thigh, pelvic swab, and the right wrist swab. YSTR, Anthony Pardon is included in the major profile. And remember, they never say match. This isn't TV. They say included or excluded. Think about the force, the friction that's needed to leave a sufficient amount of DNA and a sufficient quality of DNA on these things. Her body. The hairdryer in the cord, and the curling iron in the cord. STR, Anthony Pardon is included as a contributor. Think about this. The force, the friction, the time spent. Do you think tying those knots was something quick? Do you think it was something that took a long time to get that tight, to put them together, to think of different ways to intertwine them? That took time, that took force. And also think, she talked about sweat, bodily fluid. That could leave more. Would you be sweating if you're working that hard to tie that knot? The vaginal swab. YSTR, Anthony Pardon's single source profile. No mixtures. Single source. Ms. Rausch and Ms. Simon were talking about female noise. And again, ladies and gentlemen, think about the amount of quantity and quality DNA that had to be there for there to be a sufficient amount for a profile in her vaginal swab. As Mr. O'Brien talked about an opening, Anthony Pardon's DNA is in all the wrong places. It's on the things that bound her, and it's found inside her body, inside her vaginal swab. Dr. Daniels, forensic pathologist, has been doing this since the mid-'80s. His cause of death, strangulation. And let's talk about strangulation a little bit. Petechiae, compress, release, compress, release. Blood flow stops. Blood flow stops. And I don't know if any of you noticed this, but when he's testifying about how that could happen, pulling up, like the cords, compress, release, compress, release. Hemorrhaging in her neck, her eyes, hemorrhaging. And he testified that these are all consistent with signs of struggle. The other significant injury, the stab wound to the back of the head. Talk about the J shape, which means that it was turned or was slightly taken out and then reinserted. That's what that J shape meant. Skull fracture. There's a piece broken. What force does it require, ladies and gentlemen, to snap off a piece of somebody's skull? And then the blunt force trauma to the top of the head. Now he stated that the blunt force trauma and the stab wound to the back of the head, he didn't think those were the cause of death. Would they have rendered her unconscious? Probably. Would they have eventually caused her death? That stab wound to the back of the head eventually would have. And the bruising is important to think about. Her mouth. What is over her mouth with such force that is causing bruising on her lower lip? Bruising is a big thing because that means that Rachael Anderson's heart was still beating when this was happening. when she's having her mouth covered, when she's having the cords tied around her. Her heart is still beating. Wrong places, ladies and gentlemen. Where's Anthony Martin's phone during the murder, kidnapping, rape, and robbery of Rachael Anderson? In her apartment. Where is Anthony Pardon's phone, Anthony Pardon, when Rachel's debit card is being used? He's there. Every single one, except for the ones that Deborah said she did herself. Where is Anthony Pardon's DNA in Rachel's home? Not on any blunts, not on anything that was used to drink. It's on the things that caused her murder, the things that caused her kidnapping. Inside of her body. And on her body. On her pelvic swabs, on her inner thighs. That's where his DNA is. And we have to talk about evidence presented to you in this courtroom, in this trial. Ladies and gentlemen, is there any reasonable explanation that you have heard as evidence in this trial for that man's DNA to be in those places, for that man's phone to be in those places? Reason and common sense. You all said that you would use it. Trial does not mean this is a complicated case. Yes, there is a lot of evidence. But if you put it all together, it's not that complicated. The defendant went into Rachel's home. He kidnapped her. He raped her. He stole from her. He robbed her. Use your reason and common sense, I beg of you, and to look at the evidence that's presented in this courtroom. We would submit to you that we have proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Anthony Pardon committed all the crimes that he has been charged with. We would ask you to find him guilty of all of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Van Coolen.